Well, Mama told me when I was young, said, sit beside me, my only son. Listen closely to what I say, and if you do this, it'll help you some sunny day. Oh, take your time, don't live too fast. Troubles will come, they will pass. To find a woman, you'll find love. Don't forget that there's someone up above. Baby, be a simple kind of man. Be something love not understand. Baby, be a simple kind of man. Won't you do this for me, son, if you can? Forget your lust for the rich man's gold. All that you need now is in your soul, and you can do this, oh baby, if you try. All that I want from you, my son, is to be satisfied. Baby, be a simple kind of man. Be something you love not understand. Baby, be a simple kind of man. Won't you do this for me, son, if you can? Don't you worry, you'll find yourself. Follow the Lord and no one else. And you can do this, oh baby, if you try. All that I want from you, my son, is to be satisfied. And baby, be a simple kind of man. Be something you love not understand. Baby, be a simple kind of man. Won't you do this for me, son, if you can?
Ducks eat bread.
They do. They like it.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Here.
Got me?
Oh boy.
How you think so?
Yeah. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, Kale.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
You walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord. And hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Oh, I like to go. Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing?
Walk with me.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my
Yeah, Lord.
I want Jesus
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
to walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy.
That's the deal with that one,
Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king, and David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. You gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.
All right. There's a little bit of dog bark, some Christian
That's good stuff.
Golden. Christian Golden dedicated that rendition of Simple Kind of Man by Leonard Skinner when his mother passed. and a little bit other branding this morning. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. And somebody asked, do we always open the live streams with music? Well, I like it because I like to promote the musicians. So if you're in the corner and you're, especially if you're making your own songs. Now, Dog Bark told me he's got those beats, and if anybody wants those beats, Dog Bark will give him the beats. And so Dog Bark really wants to support you making your own music. So I always put his thing in the crawl underneath. And we'll have a couple more musicians on the way out. So if you're making music and you put it on a YouTube channel and send it to me, and if I like it, I'll put it on the beginning and the end of the live stream, and I'll put your YouTube thing so people can find you. But this morning isn't about music. This morning is about, what's happening in terms of Christianity and the rest of the culture. And I really haven't had Pete on too much. Some of you might recognize Pete. He's from Strange Theology. And of course, Kale is a regular here. So Pete, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell me about your channel and why your channel has taken the shape that it's taken so far.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and although I didn't really come in from the Jordan Peterson angle, I was listening to Joe Rogan. I was noticing just how close he was to some of the things that some of the ways that I look at the world from a biblical Christian worldview. And just finding it far more familiar than I expected from somebody like Joe Rogan, who is not only not a Christian, but sort of historically kind of, has been mocking Christianity, let's say. And so a few of his podcasts just got the gears turning for me. And I thought, man, it would be awesome to be a fly on the wall in one of these podcasts and just kind of give your 2 cents every once in a while. And then it hit me I can actually do that. I could actually, it sounded like a dumb idea in my head, but it was what if I recorded the clips that I was interested in and then recorded myself giving the feedback? And so I started doing that. And then my brother told me that I needed to find Paul Vanderklay. And so that's how he said, what you're trying to do with Joe Rogan, Paul Vanderklay is already doing with Jordan Peterson. So you got to find Paul Vanderklay. So that's how kind of things got started for me. Just wanted to have a conversation and realizing that the internet actually provides us an opportunity to do that, even if you're not in the room, so to speak. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Pete. And I also wanted Kale on this. Now, Kale's had a big summer. You had a big event at the beginning of the summer that I think really sort of lines up with this. Grim Grizz in his live stream right before this was playing some Joe Rogan with Pasulka. And I think as we get into what's happening in terms of Christianity and spirituality, especially via Joe Rogan, we're going to talk about psychedelics and we're going to talk about aliens. And so I thought Kale would be great on this, as Kale just hosted a super conference, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that and when some hopefully recordings will emerge from that. And then also Kale just got back from Europe. He was in Europe just after me. So thank you, Kale, and welcome.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Now I want to Peterson was just back on Joe Rogan. And of course, Peterson's first appearance on Rogan was a sort of a critical step in Peterson's rise, because Rogan, of course, already had a huge platform. And when Peterson came on Rogan, it was something of a revelation to a lot of people. And that gave Peterson's signal a significant boost. And as Peterson reminds us often, Rogan is probably the biggest podcast, the biggest interview show, in many ways, the biggest platform. And of course, during the last election, there's all this, did Rogan endorse Bernie? And I guess I just saw a thing that Rogan endorsed Robert F. Kennedy. And so the politicians are interested in Rogan. And of course, Rogan has sort of become a feature in the culture war too, even though Rogan, like many sort of in this corner, is he's not a he's not a, let's say, a traditional conservative by any means. Never would have presented himself that way, nor is he, but he's sort of, again, one of these neo-conservative liberal IDW types who was a liberal and has sort of gotten disillusioned. So Pete, as sort of our Rogan expert this morning, how would you frame where Rogan is in the culture and in this culture war that we've got going right now?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of so I've probably listened to Rogan for the past 3 years or so. So going back before that, I don't know where he might be coming from. I do think that he doesn't feel the need to sort of temper his language towards any sort of political field. He's just going to say what he wants to say. I think that is the exercise on his podcast. He says a thing, he kind of lets the internet sort it out to some degree. I don't even know if at times if he even believes it himself. He's just sort of like this endorsement with RFK. I listened to a little bit of a clip, and he's not even coming out and saying, I'm endorsing RFK, I'm going to vote for RFK. He just says, I think I'd probably, it's more like he's just coming off, sharing his thoughts, and he's not really trying to be sensitive to the political environment. He's just a guy talking on the internet, and he happens to have found that a lot of people like to listen to that. If you think about it, Joe is he's not an intellectual. I mean, I'm not saying he's not a smart guy, but he's just a regular guy. I mean, he had some popularity from being in Hollywood and stuff like that, but I don't think that's not enough to explain why his podcast is the kind of voice in culture that it is. I think people find it refreshing to listen to a guy just share his thoughts without a lot of the, I don't know, carving of the language, trying to make it sound PC or whatever. Just say what you think. And if you're an idiot, the internet will tell you,
And of course, Rogan has said, he doesn't read comments.
Right.
He, and he'll describe himself. So when I needed puppets, because I have trouble having Rogan clips on my channel, he'd say, I'm just a dumb monkey. But that's also kind of a shtick, because Rogan's not dumb.
Right.
He reads a lot, clearly. He's interested in a lot of ideas. He's interested in a lot of thoughts. And so I think in some ways, I think part of what we're seeing is sort of another populism, but this is more of a populism on the left, because of course, I mean, sort of Bernie Sanders to Robert F. Kennedy. I don't know. Kale, do you watch much Rogan, or I didn't really bring you on for the Rogan side of it.
Yeah, no,
culture side.
Yeah, I've listened to quite a bit, especially in the sort of the early heady days of the IDW. Because really, besides Rubin, that was sort of where everybody would go to have these conversations. And like, for instance, it was Rogan who I really met the Weinsteins. It was Rogan where I, met, even like Ben Shapiro would go on in those early days, all those cats. Right. And I've known Rogan since the days of what was Fear Factor and all those sort of weird afternoon reality TV programs from the late 90s and early aughts. And, he's a bro. I mean, he really is a guy. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. I mean, he's like so many guys I went to high school with, so many guys I'm friends with, they're kind of default eminent frame guys. They're not terribly deep when it comes to positive theology, but they know they don't like hypocrisy. They know they don't like priests who prey upon children. These are just very normal things. He happens to be, really dedicated to exercise and fitness and fighting. And I think it is through that he recognizes excellence and greatness, in terms of really dedicating yourself to a craft, be that artistic or entertainment or intellectual. I think he really, there's that expression, game recognizes game. And I think that's what he recognizes in people. And so he has a real nose for those things. Now, what I think has knocked Rogan off of his easy life, that he was very fortunate enough to create for himself, were sort of two things. I think the COVID mess really blew him away. I think he was shocked to find out that a lot of his liberal friends were really authoritarians. And number two, and perhaps the most important part of this, especially for Pete's work, is that Rogan dropped acid and was honest enough to recognize that he saw something that doesn't fit. It doesn't add up. That things are way more strange than the imminent frame would suggest. So,
how does that strike you, Pete? Are you tracking with Kale?
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out if my AC is too loud, and I was trying to ask the chat, so I got a little distracted. Yeah, I think that if it's too loud for you guys, let me know.
No, you sound fine.
Okay. Yeah, and I wonder if that sort of a mystical experience, right? I've thought about Rogan in the sense that some people think, oh, he will follow like Russell Brand. He will follow suit with some of these sort of Christian curious podcasters. And I don't know that that's his path necessarily, but to Kale's point, it's like, there's more out there and I don't know how to explain it. And maybe some of this religious language or these religious ideas that I've abandoned early on might come back to like help me sort of frame reality. I think that that's why he wants to have Jordan Peterson on. I think that he likes Jordan Peterson's frame. And I think that Jordan Peterson is a little bit easier to talk to because he's not in your face with Jesus. He just talks about Jesus like Jesus is an idea, or there's this, archetypal Jesus, not, hey, you need this person in your life. That type of, Jordan's not coming at it from that kind of approach. And so it's interesting to look at both of these guys and how they speak into culture, because I think Joe Rogan is sort of coming from this maybe more mystical side of things, and Jordan Peterson is coming from sort of the philosophical side of things.
When I think of, so there's one of the videos that it didn't get made this week because I've just been with Nancy's death. It's everything's a little bit chaotic right now. So sorry, not a lot of video production happening right now. But I watched a video by Thomas Flight. And for those of you in the membership section, there is a conversation with him that I have in the membership section. It's going to stay there. I watched a video with Thomas Flight, and he had this great video recently about how acting has changed. And he makes the point that in the earlier days of cinema, most acting was theatrical, and it was sort of bound by a type. So you had all these standard types, and what happened in the movies was you had the interaction between these almost stereotypes. And what begins to happens really early, and Brando sort of breaks it open with on the water. I don't remember which way, Stella. Brando sort of
Streetcar Named Desire.
Okay, Streetcar Named Desire. Brando sort of breaks. And then we have this new realism, and this realism is supposed to be authentic. And in the video I was going to make, and might still make it, it's that really sort of maps onto a culture of sincerity and a culture of authenticity. Go ahead, Kale.
Well, I think you need to, if you're going to work on this, I just want you to insert. There's a distinct change in craft when it moves from a primarily stage reality to a filmed reality, right? Because the frame, the frame all of a sudden goes, to this, right? And Brando was really one of those first guys to make that true transition to where he could, and again, you think of what's the other guy, Paul Newman, what's the guy who did Bullet?
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen, right? And Clint Eastwood falls into the same category. It's like everything, like they say everything right here. Right here.
Yeah.
And it's none of this sort of this histrionic flourishes. Like if you watch, like if you want an easy illustration of this, watch a Laurence Olivier production of Hamlet versus Mel Gibson's Hamlet. Right? And I think Mel Gibson's Hamlet is great. Like I truly think it's a wonderful piece of cinema. But Laurence Olivier is constantly working the stage, and it just doesn't translate to us, right? It doesn't translate to us because we grew up not on stagecraft, we grew up on cinemacraft.
So now to get to Rogan with this, Kale, I think when he's a bro, he's a dude, he's a guy. So much, it's been fascinating watching the political chatter when, Biden steps out and Harris steps in. And it's like, I know nothing about Harris, and because I gave up following politics in about 2014. And and I know nothing about Harris, and then she picks the governor of Minnesota that I could never have named as her running mate, and I know nothing about this dude, but I watch all of the usual properties just sort of line up on the internet. We hate Trump. Oh, he named JD Vance. Now we hate JD Vance. We used to like him, but now we hate him.
Yeah.
And so everybody sort of lines up. And then, of course, now Harris and Walsh. Everybody's lining up, and all of the usual characters either hate or love people according to everything that's on the stage. And I think what you said, Pete, about Rogan is that he's got that FU money now, and he doesn't read the comments. And now this has also played politically in various. Generally, George W. Bush sort of played this. I call him as I see him, and Trump sort of played this too. But it does get into, we're doing this sense making, and we've got this extreme desire and sincere belief that somehow this authenticity deep down is where we're going to find truth. And so we're really attracted to someone like Joe Rogan, who he's not bought out to the Democrats. He's not sold out to the Republicans. He's going to have whoever he wants on his channel there. It doesn't matter if people say this guy's a COVID quack, or this guy's a UFO freak, or this guy punches people for a living. It doesn't matter. These are his friends, and he's going to have them on the channel, and he's going to let them say what they want to say. And it doesn't matter how politically incorrect or correct it is. He's just going to do it. And you can scream all you want and frame him in any way you want, but he's just going to do it, and you're just going to have to live with it. And I think this is it's deeply tied again to authenticity. And I think that then gets tied to the psychedelic fascination, the UFO fascination. It doesn't matter for him how much status he loses, because he's like, I got all my status and it's bunkered up, and you're really not going to take it from me. And it's in fact that impervious quality that gives me the freedom to just say whatever I feel like.
I just want to jump in here. I think that I think we need to be careful by saying that Rogan is independent. I think who most people care about in terms of what other people think of them is just a little bit different than Rogan's, right? He cares about, like, look, how did the whole show start? The whole show started, at least the way that I've heard the legend, is that, after a set at the comedy club, he, interviewed people in the dressing room. And then he took that same thing when he, because he's really into the MMA thing, right? And he's sort of announcing that, right? And so the two types of people that he really does care about in terms of status, right, are comics and athletes. Okay, so
Wrestlers, grapplers.
Yeah, right. In other words, everybody cares, right? Nobody's independent. It's just that most people, when they fire up, the YouTube camera, who do they, most people care about, what politicians think of them, or what important people at, networks think of them, like all those kinds of things. Joe does not care about that, but he does care about like what Dave Chappelle thinks of him.
Sure.
I would bet.
There's a sorry, Kale, if I'm interrupting your thought. There's an interesting thing that goes on, and for those of us who sort of participate in this space, I think you see it. Even if you're participating in the chat, I think you see it. Is that there is a different type of conversation going on, and maybe Joe Rogan. I don't know if he's like the forerunner of this or what, but he's certainly a part of it. Is that he's not interviewing people necessarily. He's talking to people. He's having a conversation. And if you just think about having a conversation in sort of embodied space, you're always aware of who the person you're talking to, right? And maybe it's a couple of people, and you're kind of taking what you know of them into account as you frame your words and things like that. And so now we have this like potential audience that you have to imagine, because you're putting the conversation online. Now, is it really shaping the way you say things, the way maybe having a conversation, with your Aunt Margie over, Thanksgiving dinner, what her triggers are maybe, or something like that. And so you might frame your conversation based off of what you know about your Aunt Margie. We're imagining these people listening to this conversation. I don't know exactly who they all are. And so it does put you into a little bit of a different space. I don't know, Kale, if that's exactly what you're talking about, but I do see that Joe is aware of that. He's aware of this audience, this potential audience. And I do think that, to kind of pull off of what you were saying about comics and MMA fighters, I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's one of the reasons his podcast does have appeal. And there's a philosophical reason for that maybe goes even into theater, right? Is that, for one, the theater, at least in sort of sort of the Greek philosophical way of thinking about it, was a place to go to sort of purge your emotions, right? You go there to laugh, you go there to cry. Comedy and tragedy are the two kind of major themes going on. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you couldn't vote in the Senate unless you had been to the theater, because the idea was that you had sort of purged your own emotions, and you had participated with this thing that got you laughing, got you sort of outside of yourself. But then the grappling side of things, the MMA side of things, like there's always a sort of there was always a sense that the Greeks invented philosophy because they wrestle in the nude. Okay, I'm sorry, this has gotten way sort of like esoteric or whatever, but like they wrestle in the nude. What are they doing? They're exposing
your ears.
they're being honest. They're giving, and so Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan both do this, right? Jordan Peterson's book is We Who Wrestle with God. They put stuff out there so that other people will grapple with it. And sort of test your ideas out there in that world where this audience can sort of come in and participate. Now, Joe doesn't read the comments. I think that's a mistake. I try to read comments as much as I can, because that's, I think, part of the dialogue. That's part of the process. And so I don't know, maybe, just I'm sort of throwing this idea out there that there's comedy and there's grappling, and they're both kind of helping us. Maybe to Paul's point, this sort of political theater that's going on, or the theater that's going on, they're sort of helping us discern what's authentic, what's genuine from what is false, what's kayfabe, what's the production that's out there. It's like we're becoming more sensitive to those things that are produced and fake, which means we're becoming more sensitive to that which is authentic as well. And that grappling and that comedy are part of that, I think.
I think that I really like that, Pete. That's really helpful, because one of my favorite Rogan conversations was with Bill Maher, who is also sort of in this space. and I was going to make a video about that, and I had this. I can't find the clip right now, but it's he and Bill Maher are talking, and they talk about this fact that something with comedy, I mean, laughter is sort of unprovoked, and that's sort of so now we're getting into the liminal realms.
Real
Why?
laughter,
Right? It's in that way, it's sort of the core of authenticity. It's enchanted, as you were. It arises, and even we laugh about things we're not supposed to find funny, and that's why comedy's sort of been at the center of a lot of this drama right now. And Dave Chappelle too, when he does comedy, is sort of it's the illicit. It's the it doesn't matter whether it's politically correct or politically incorrect. It evokes, and there's also something about wrestling is complex because it's sort of inside the kayfabe. But with MMA, it's again there's sort of it's sort of an entrails. It's reading entrails. It's reading tea leaves. I've been watching the Olympics, and I mean, before every race and before every competition, all the commentators say, okay, these are the people to watch because these are the people who have run. And so on one hand, we're always looking sort of for the set, okay, track record, it's all measured. And these are the people who are always going to compete at the highest level. And so part of us is sort of delighted, depending on who the person is, if the favorite wins. But then there's this other experience that if the underdog comes up, I watched the men's decathlon, and right away from one of the early competitions, this guy from Norway who won it, I mean, he just seemed to be, they're all talking about these other people, and there's this kid, and he just seemed to be happy to be at the Olympics. And for so many of these things, he ran his personal best. And this is the kind of story we love because, again, it's an enchanted story. Yeah. It comes from a place that isn't mapped territory. And so I think you're really right that for Rogan, that both the comedy and, I mean, the rawest sport, MMA, that this is his domain. So in that sense, he's sort of a creature from enchantment. And again, when we talk about his religion, quite clearly, even though he's sort of a UFO, psychedelic, perennialism, at least the somewhat I've heard from him, that's sort of the space he's at. But again, this is sort of, again, a turn towards enchantment.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what's given him power in the culture.
What exactly is the turn toward enchantment, Paul?
Well, everything about him is from this enchanted. He's almost from fairy.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's comedy again. Comedy comes from. I find it funny. I don't have reasons for it. I mean, it's very non-emissarian.
Right.
And same with MMA. This is as raw.
In fact, it's almost poking fun at an emissarian conclusion.
Yep.
I'm struck. I'm sorry, Pete. I'm struck that both comedy and wrestling, let's say, or MMA. One of the beautiful things about both of them is that you can't fake winning, really. Comics will talk about that peculiar feling of going up there and bombing, and no amount of like, oh, it was okay. No amount of that is going to work. Like, it's and Paul, I know you because you've been doing this for a long time. I know what it's like to go into the pulpit. I know what it's like to go into the classroom, and you think you've got a good thing ready to go, and you're stoked for it, and just my goodness, I'm dying up here. Can somebody, and so it's totally exposing, right? And one of the things that when you talk about the agent in the arena, and I know you use it. We're talking about God number one, God number two, but I always think of the arena as as the ultimate frame, right? The arena is the frame in which we can see excellence and the good and the true exposed, right?
Yeah.
And there's no getting around it one way or the other. You know, two guys walk into the arena and the bell goes off and one guy wins. That there's no faking that. And so so Rogan does that, right? He does that kind of work, and then he can kind of retreat and then have conversations.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like looking for validation, you know, like it's nice if a student comes up to me and says, "Oh, Mr. Zelden, you know, that's okay. You know, it wasn't that bad. You know, there's always tomorrow." It's nice when they offer those kinds of things, but you know, it's a different thing to go into the teacher's lounge, right, and be like, "Man, I just bombed," and to have another person there be like, "Yeah, no, you know, I get it." Anyway, there's a sort of a different kind of thing, and so that's why I'm struck with this podcast. Is it's almost as if he is kind of like looking for other people who aren't afraid to go into the arena and die.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't know, in one of the things Rogan talks about, and I don't know how true this is, but he says he thinks that the internet is making it impossible for people to lie. And I think what he means is obviously the internet gives lots of opportunities for people to lie, but you can't get very far with it, you know, because there's millions of people who are looking at that going, that's BS. No, what you just said doesn't make any sense. And actually, I got a clip from a year ago where you said a different thing, you know, and so there is this, and I don't know if you were using the word exposing, but there's this, yeah, you cannot hide. There's an honesty happening. We hope. I mean, we hope.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah.
Well, I think also so you've got, I think you're right, Kale, in that the podcast itself is a conversation. And there is an enchantment to any conversation. I mean, we by no means had a script today. All I had was an idea, and I talked to Kale and I talked to Pete. And so there's no script today. We're working on this. So there's something of enchantment. We don't really know where this conversation is going to go. And of course, the hive mind, the comment section, is a bit of a chaos creature, and there are a few chaos creatures in there. But there's always this relationship, let's say, between eternity and normal time. And so the enchantment in that sense always sort of comes from eternity. So his DMT, his aliens, the muse which evokes laughter, the god. I mean, if you read the Iliad, of course, who wins the battles on the field outside of Troy? It's the one for whom the gods come down, and of course the gods also rescue. So you do have that sacred space and time, and then you have the normal time. And so the podcast is sort of it's coming closer to normal. It's unscripted. You don't know what's going to happen. So there's some enchantment in it, but at the same time, it is ordinary time, and he is a bro, and these are people, and he talks to who he wants to talk. I mean, there's no sort of, if you watch, let's say, mass media, there, you know who's going to be on the show because they sort of have to. There's the set out there, and this is, you know, I think it's our desire for less to be scripted. And again, remember, Fear Factor is one of those early reality TV shows, and so he has always been in this space.
Well, I think that you know, some of the way, I don't know, maybe news is presented or whatever, is they are afraid of going off script. You know, they can't handle going off script, whereas sort of podcast format, at least from Joe and from others that I think are doing it well, there is no script. I mean, we're just sort of put voices together, and there's that dialogue, sort of magical thing that happens. And I wonder if, you know, the people that are spending more time in that are the ones finding a sort of re-enchantment happening. I mean, Russell Brand is the other one. You know, it's like, why did he go? His journey is fascinating. And part of it was that he started a podcast. He started talking to people and had some pretty honest conversations, you know, and one of the people that he talked to was Joe Rogan. I mean, I think that was a couple of years ago at this point, but I mean, there is something to that, you know, we're moving from a world that was heavily scripted to a world that's more improv, more, you know, we're not sure what we're going to say here, but hopefully
Well, and I think, you know, of course, Rogan is famous for long podcasts.
Yeah.
And so in long podcasts, you tend to, on one hand, you have an audience who is, they're listening in the car. They're listening when they're putting that tile shower together. They're listening when they're painting the room. They're listening when they're cleaning the house or doing yard work. And a long podcast also sort of creates then this, also sort of this dual time. So you have the long podcast and then you have the clips, because the clips are those moments when the speaker says something that maybe they didn't even know. So again, it's back to this intervention from above, if you will. And then of course, now with the new technology, we have the words are appearing beneath. I'm thinking about, you know, watching the evolution of, let's say, even Jonathan Peugeot's podcast, just looking at the one that he made recently about the boxers in the Olympics. The teaser on the podcast has that enchanted moment, or the, you know, buzzwords or holy words. They have the buzzwords and the holy words from all of what he's going to say with all of the rambling. And then here's the thing. And here, both of them are available to us. Yeah. And that, of course, Rogan is both super long podcasts. And now he's back on YouTube, but it's always also been the shorts and the clips.
Yeah. When there's a couple podcasts ago, and I think he even said this within the Diana Walsh Pasulka episode. So I'm interested to see what Grizz was talking about with that. But they were talking about that flow state, you know, that you get in. Athletes will get into a flow state. Authors will get into a flow state. Dialogues can get into a flow state. And that's where that inspiration happens. And so it's those inspired moments that you're like, oh, that we can clip that. And you know, it's this condensed, you know, rich kind of moment in the conversation that maybe it's only 30 seconds long, but it could be meaningful for somebody if they hear it, you know.
Well, and you know, it's interesting watching Anselman, because part of my point about this week's, the only sort of thread I could get out this week, which was interesting Trent Horn's similarity to Peter Boghossian. I mean, you find that with like Anselman and T. Grogan, and you might think, oh, how on earth could Anselman and T. Grogan sort of be on the same page? And I think that has a lot to do with the, you know, later Anselman will say, you know, when did this whole enchantment thing come up? Well, it came up in theories of modernity, in theories of, if we can basically engineer our way into eternity. It is the end of history. It is if we put all of the pieces down here below, it's functionally the Tower of Babel. Once we have mastered brick making technology, now we can scale brick upon brick upon brick upon brick and look God in the eye. And what I think is happening in terms of religion in America, and this has been happening for a long time, I think it really gets kicked off during the counterculture, and then, of course, the Christian element of the counterculture with the Jesus Revolution, and Pentecostalism, and I think, you know, now, say with Rod Dreher's focus on re-enchantment and sort of re-looking at, I mean, I mentioned before in Chino, guys who 5 years ago had been, you know, couldn't get enough new atheism are now on their knees kissing a box in an Orthodox church that's said to be holding the bones of saints. And I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. Things are moving.
So I'm interested. I'm actually interested to hear what you make of that, Paul. You know, because, you know, a lot of that stuff is way, you know, in part kind of more familiar for me, but I would imagine for someone like you and the tradition out of which you spring, that's just crazy town. I mean, like, what the heck's going on?
Well, you know, Protestantism had its own way of evoking the divine. I mean, Pentecostalism comes out of Protestant. Now you're not going to have, you're going to have music, let's say, do it. And of course, look at the word music. What's the root word of muse? So there we have it. And so I think,
and the Irish call a song an air. I mean, all of this wind, air, rauch, it's all spirit stuff.
Yeah. So I think what happens, I think this again goes back to the early 20th century too, when at the end of the 19th century, everybody is saying, well, we know everything now. Everything's been invented. We understand everything. And the little that is left, we will figure out. And then we will build a stairway to heaven.
But the little that's left has to be unmagicked, right? If you look at the root of disenchantment, somebody asked in the comments just now, where's all this enchantment? Well, where it really comes from is when what's his name tells us that we need to come to terms with a disenchanted world, right? And if my reading is true, it means the unmagicking of the world, right? And so so an enchantment is really, I mean, and we know this, even the word enchantment, right? It's just another word for a spell, right? The to enchant, it's not so much to re-enchant the world, it's to sort of open your eyes up again to see the enchantment that is already there, right? Yeah. And so, but that is really, again, that's very odd. And so keep going, Paul, about this. You say that sort of the charismatic stuff comes out of the Protestant tradition. I want to hear more about
the Protestants have just done it in different ways. I mean, again, so I was in these cathedrals, and I mean, these are impressive buildings.
Yeah.
And then,
they do things to you physically. Like when you walk in, it's like, I used to describe it as, my throat would fall into my belly.
Right.
And because I couldn't speak, and it was physical. Right. Now, you were there for what, 3 weeks? You get used to it on some level, but still, even when you've kind of gotten used to it, you walk around and all of a sudden you're like, my God, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
This is huge, and I am small, and I am nothing. And wow, thank you, Lord, for putting me right here, right now. Right. Yeah. That's sort of the overwhelming feeling.
I walk into the Duomo in Milan, and it's like I'm in Moria before it's taken over by orcs.
Yeah.
These enormous pillars, they go up to the sky. And it's interesting because each cathedral sort of has its thing that makes it special, but there are other ways in which this cathedral kind of has this thing, this cathedral has that thing. So of course, Vervaeke talks about psychotechnologies, and it was so funny. Richard Rowland blocked Michael Satori on Twitter, but part of the point that Michael Satori
it was a good point. Michael was making a good point.
Yeah, is that the Protestants and the Catholics and the Orthodox all have their ways of provoking experiences of other. God is surely here in this place.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking off my shoes, and this is holy ground. But in order for there to be holy ground or sacred time or sacred space, there needs to be ordinary ground and ordinary space. And of course, this has been deep in Peugeot's contribution to the corner for a long time, because it's Peugeot that has basically said, well, it's not, the Bible isn't just, as Protestants tend to do, the Bible is this supernatural book. And I mean, when I was younger, there was this silly cartoon, Bible is like this super book, but then the super book was also sort of wedded with technology and that silly little cartoon. And but Peugeot was much more, it's how do we, the Bible explains the structure of reality. And the reality isn't, this world is not my home, I'll fly away. I mean, basically, religions are always playing on these. This is why I say two worlds mythologies aren't going anywhere. Whether you sort of map them sort of physically in your mind, or you just have solely sacred and ordinary. It's the interaction between those two things that gives its energy. And again, back to Joe Rogan, I think that's Joe Rogan sort of holds the tension between this enchanted world, which for him is comedy and violence and psychedelics and aliens. And he's a bro guy. You know, if you go and you hang out with Joe Rogan, you expect to get some good barbecue. And maybe we're going to, I just saw in this little feed that he brought a 1,000 horsepower pickup truck. And, we're going to go wild boar hunting. So Rogan, I think, really sort of captures this liminal space between the sacred and the normal. And in a sense, sort of like batteries, the opposite poles of a battery. The more you can push them together, the more power you get from, the repulsion.
Well, it was interesting too that he had Alan Graham on after Jordan Peterson. That was one of the points.
Yeah, explain that because I saw you made a video, but I haven't had time to keep up with this stuff. Who's
yeah,
Alan
that's
Graham.
Well, and so and I've pointed this out a few times on my podcast. And so if you guys are new to my podcast, I try not to focus on Joe Rogan, but he gives me a lot of material. So I've done a few of these where I realize that what's happening in Joe Rogan's podcast, that it connects to other conversations that are going on. And I look at it like a barometer for sort of culture. Like Socrates talked about looking at the city, right? To understand the soul of humanity, right? Zooming in. And so I think podcasting is giving us this sort of zooming in thing. And so he has Jordan Peterson on, and again, Jordan Peterson is good at sort of building the framework, but and maybe, I just don't know Peterson enough, but it just seemed like he gave all frame and no culture. There was nothing in the frame. There was no person. We're talking about Christ as an idea. We're talking about Jesus as an idea, as an archetype, but the person is gone. And so and I thought it was interesting that Jordan Peterson's podcast was on Thursday and Alan Graham came on the Friday podcast. I would assume Joe and his team would want a big name like Jordan Peterson to be Friday, so it catches all the people through the weekend, and then by Monday he's got somebody else. But Jordan came on Thursday and Alan Graham came on Friday. And Alan Graham is really not interested in talking about the philosophy of his religion. He's just embodying it. He's just saying, this is what we do. He said, we just love God and we never love our neighbors.
Who is Alan Graham?
He is he runs a couple sort of mission organizations, ministry organizations. And the main one that he has is called Mobile Loaves and Fishes. And it started out feeding the homeless, but it has evolved into a whole community that he has built in Austin, in Texas, where they're bringing in people off the streets and essentially sort of giving them a chance to, I don't know, maybe rehabilitate. That sounds like a bad word, but oftentimes it's just a matter of getting out of the environment of being on the streets that is enough to help someone sort of reorientate their lives in a more positive direction. So Alan, he's got billionaire backers and stuff like that, and they're building communities of people, of homeless people. And he's a Catholic Christian man, and he's just saying, this is what we're going to do because this is what sort of the Bible tells us. And even Joe at one point was like, well, what do you do with all this stuff that's hard to explain, like the virgin birth and the Trinity and the resurrection? He's like, I don't know, man, I'm not here to figure that stuff out. He's like, I'm just here to live it out. I thought, oh my gosh, like, was this intentional? You have Jordan Peterson who's framing it.
Yeah.
And then Alan Graham who's living it and and he kept pointing to stories in his life, and he kept pointing to the person of Jesus. He kind of, it wasn't a deeply philosophical conversation. What was so funny is even in the Jordan Peterson conversation with Joe Rogan, Joe asked Jordan, after he went on this big long monologue about what the cross really means, Joe Rogan says, but do you think that's what most people think of the cross? Don't they just think Jesus died for my sins? And Jordan said, well, it depends on how sophisticated they are. And like, so Jordan is like this deeply sophisticated, sort of lays out the, framework and the archetype. And then Alan Graham, who's like, quote unquote, not sophisticated, just goes, hey man, I'm not here to figure it all out. I'm just here to live it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And Joe, so then you ask the question of like, what is going on here? Like, did Joe and his team intentionally craft the podcasts to land one after the other? Or is there some other power at work here? Is there some other force, you know, that's at work, that's sort of in between, that says, and even Alan in his podcast talks about providence. He's like, this conversation was basically providentially oriented, so that you and I could have this conversation right here and right now. He's like, we've been talking for 2 years, but now's the day that we have this conversation. It's like, man, it's so fascinating. And then the other question is, how did Joe get involved with a guy who's serving the homeless because of his Christian faith? Like, how does Joe Rogan come into contact with this person? He was at a fundraiser. Why is Joe Rogan at a fundraiser? Because he's starting to think that he needs to change his life, do something with his life. Maybe his wife talked him into going to the fundraiser. I don't know, but somebody got Joe Rogan to that fundraiser to care for the homeless. And you know,
that's not far. Again, Joe Rogan starts on the left. And if there's one thing, I mean, okay, care for the homeless, this sort of benevolent mercy. Yeah. So that's not far from Joe Rogan, how he grew up, and he'll talk about being a latchkey kid in San Francisco.
I'm not buying that, Paul. No,
really?
No, not at all. No, he's a default libertarian with who doesn't want people to tell. He doesn't want anybody. Look, I'm not talking where he is right now, but just talking about like where he comes out of. He's like, I want to screw girls and I want to do drugs, and I don't want anybody to tell me I can't do those things.
Yeah, but he's married now, and his wife tells him not to screw girls. At least
I get all that, but like, and so I think you're over-indexing his Bernie phase.
Okay,
right? Bernie, like, why was Bernie a genuine threat to win the Democratic nomination until the party stepped in and said, no, we're not playing that game, right? Because Bernie came across to a whole slew of millennials as authentic, not full of shit.
Right. He pumped his own gas as opposed to limousine Hillary.
And, you know, it's not ideological. You know, you might retrofit that a little bit. Like, oh, yeah, I've always been for single payer. You know, I've always kind of cared for the poor. I mean, but the same thing would be said of anybody. Any normie American is going to say, yeah, I care about the poor. What do I do with that? I don't know. But so I don't know. I'm not buying that. What Pete's talking about, right, to me is, look, when you're motivated to earn FU money, part of that is because you want people to not have any undue attachment to you. But though I'm not a wealthy man, I have certainly in my time spent enough time with wealthy men and women to know that when you finally achieve fuck you money, you all of a sudden recognize that you have a deeper commitment to other people because you know at the end of the day you did nothing except be kind of lucky to get this money.
Well, doesn't Trump have fuck you money? He's not a philanthropist.
I think, but okay, but let's steel man orange man for a second, okay?
All right.
I genuinely think that he is running for president out of a weird, I mean, again, I can't pretend to understand what goes on in that man's brain, but I think he is genuinely motivated because he cares. I know it sounds crazy, but he doesn't need any of this.
Well, I don't doubt that.
I think he feels that he however one stumbles into these sort of things. I mean, Paul, how many times have you run into a wealthy person who they kind of find you, right? And they want to support some ministry that you've done. And like, you don't really know how they found you. And it doesn't really make any sense. But all of a sudden, this like kind of wealthy person just has a passion for your thing.
Yeah.
Like to me, what I think Pete's getting at is that that's part of the hand of providence.
Yeah.
That he's reacting to. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fan per se. I'm just curious.
Now, our own comedian here says, now, Joe Rogan's wife has come up a few times in the comments section. Pete, what do we know about Joe Rogan's wife?
You know, he doesn't talk a ton about his family, as you can imagine,
Which
like
makes good sense.
yeah, makes good sense. I believe he's got a couple of kids. I think they're all daughters. So he's got a lot of he lives in this feminine world, and I don't know how long they've been married, but
well over 20 years.
Oh, really? I thought this was more recent. Okay. Well, that says something. I will say this. My theory has been, as I have followed this over the last 2 years, one of the main things that got me to start really engaging in sort of these dialogues with Joe Rogan's podcast and others is he did a podcast with Adam Curry. And Adam Curry is the MTV VJ, sort of credited with inventing podcasting. Oh. And he was on Joe Rogan, and Adam Curry's testimony was, hey man, I just started asking like these people who were Christians about their faith because God was the one conspiracy theory that I never really looked into.
Yeah.
And man, when I started looking into it, it pulled me in, and I realized, he says, Jesus was a badass outlaw and he has changed my outlook on life. And he points to the person of Jesus. After he credits the people in his life, what has happened over the last 2 years is person after person after person has come on Joe Rogan and said, hey man, I found Jesus. Like Chris Diaz, Hulk Hogan, Rampage Jackson. I mean, all of these people have come on and basically said, well, Jesus changed my life. And when the people in your life start to tell you that Jesus changed their life, that means something. We've talked about how sort of comedy sort of circumvents the sort of logic barrier that we might try to put up. People do that as well. And one of the beautiful things that I thought Alan Graham said on his podcast, on Joe's podcast, was he was talking about the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage that he had gone on. Yeah. And he said, it's the people that you meet along the way. Again, he said, you can't script it. You can't choreograph it. You can't manage it. But the thing that makes that pilgrimage so important, it's not just the cathedrals and all these other things. It's the people that you meet along the way. Yeah, yeah. So I say all that to say that I have a suspicion that either Joe's wife, or somebody in Joe's family still has a deep commitment to their Christian faith, which is why he ended up at a fundraiser for a homeless shelter, essentially a homeless shelter. But I don't know. I don't know that we have. Well,
your podcast, your YouTube channel. I mean, you seem to have really, every time Joe Rogan sort of hits this Christian note, you have a video. So that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, because I mean, I'm not primarily interested in the political. I don't really care who Joe Rogan votes for, but you've been paying very careful attention to when he has Christians on the show, what they say and how Joe Rogan responds to it. So do you think there's been movement in Joe in terms of, because it does seem he used to sort of be more with the new atheist in terms of mocking religion, and now it seems there's an openness. I mean, have you seen movement in him?
I think so. I mean, he had Stephen C. Meyer on, I think it was last summer, so
Jordan Peterson really wants him to have Peugeot on.
He didn't mention Peugeot. I thought maybe Vervaeke could be another person who would be awesome for Joe Rogan. Vervaeke, just and the imaginal and the sort of transformative power of story and tying that to the gospel, at least in my own world. I think that's huge. I do see movement. I think that I've said this before, but I think Joe Rogan is the right kind of skeptic. I think you still hear some skepticism in his voice. You still hear some resistance. I don't know that he's resistant to maybe the gospel or to the person of Christ. He's resistant to sort of like past religious experiences that have put this whole thing in kind of a weird category for him. Yeah, and I think some of that is breaking down.
Yeah, I think that's the baggage that I'm talking about. I'm pretty sure he knows people who were abused in the Boston area with the whole spotlight thing.
Yeah, and he has opened up a little bit about that. I think it was actually the conversation he had with Sebastian Junger. He talked about that a little bit. So that's 4 or 5 podcasts ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago. And yeah, it's you even have Jordan Peterson, who when he was on Pints with Aquinas, and I'm sorry I forget that guy's name, but
Matt Fradd.
yeah, they're listing off all these podcasters who have become sort of Christian curious or Jesus curious, and even Russell Brand was, I think, had converted at that point. And Jordan Peterson lists Joe Rogan in that list of podcasters who have become Christian. Now, I don't think Joe has become Christian, but I honestly thought that maybe Jordan had just spoken out of turn there, and I wasn't sure they were gonna do the podcast anymore. But they did. They did it, and it was okay. You know, I think the Jordan Peterson podcast was a good one, but
I think Jordan's in a. If you don't mind, I want to ask you all what you think where Peterson is right now, because I think he's in an interesting place right now because he's kind of cringe now. And I don't think
hot takes.
And I don't think he knows it. And it's a little embarrassing. And, you know, look, I've always been a fan, you know, Paul, you and I have talked about this for forever, you know, but I think that this sort of putting his big toe in the water and pulling it out, and putting his big toe in the water and pulling it out, I think the game's done. And so I think it's, you know, to quote my very Southern, very ladylike mother, it's shit or get off the pot time.
He's got that Gospels series coming out, doesn't he? Like he's done Genesis, he's done Exodus, he's supposed to be doing the Gospels. That'll be recorded a big
already. It's
test.
So it's in production at Daily Wire. It should come out anytime now. It's, to me, it's interesting.
I mean, he really thought he was going to blow up the internet with his Rogan. I mean, he even tweeted out before he showed up on the Rogan thing. He's like, "We're going to break the record again." Like, no.
So if you go back to Peterson on Joe Rogan in 2022, it's the one where he's just wearing a tuxedo. Okay, not his crazy suits yet. The 2022 episode, it's episode 1769. That one blew up. That one was an amazing episode. It was, I want to say it was 4 hours long. It's a really long episode. The one that he just did with Joe Rogan was 2.5 hours long. And when I saw that, I went, they didn't really get into that flow state. They didn't really get into a good conversation, because normally I think he would talk to Jordan Peterson for at least 3 hours, I would think.
And I got the sense that Peterson, he wanted to talk about his book. And I got the sense that, again, that was much more, I want to promote my book. I want to, and I think Kale, that's some of what you're picking up on, that Peterson is sort of, I mean, Peterson in 2016, 2017, he was hunted. And so he was, you know, he was reacting. And Peterson in those years, again, when he came, because of course, when I would talk, Randall's would come to me and I would talk to them. How did you find Peterson? Good number of them said Joe Rogan. A lot of them said Joe Rogan. And when Peterson was on Rogan those first couple of times, Peterson was unmapped territory. And I think Joe was just really fascinated by it. And of course, some of that is sort of the natural evolution of a relationship. Joe and Peterson are much more mapped territory of each other now. But I think some of it too is that Peterson is it's just the reality about people with respect to, say, cultural heat. Sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're not. Peterson's not particularly hot right now. And he, of course, has been pretty brutally framed in the culture war. And so people sort of have the same tribal instinctive reaction to Peterson that they might have to Trump or to Harris or to Biden. I mean, a lot of those people are set. And that's sort of a reduction. But I also think, I see that a lot of people are like, oh, when's Peterson going to, you know, he was baptized as a child, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, United Church of Canada. So when is Peterson going to join a church? And I think, my point has been, I don't think Peterson has moved that much from where he was. I think he's more convinced of a lot of what he believed before, but I still think he's thinking archetypes. And that moment when, in that talk with Peugeot right after Peterson comes back, I mean, that was a moment. Basically, again, it's when does eternity touch time? And of course, that's at the heart of the Christian message, because Christians say it's in the person of Jesus Christ when the Logos becomes flesh. And I don't know that this transformation has happened in Jordan. And so I still get the sense that Jordan is more convinced in his theological framework, but his daughter, to the best of my knowledge, worships with evangelicals. His wife now partakes of the Eucharist with Catholics. And I think Jordan remains on the fence, and he finds his mission on that fence, saying, I happily help people go into one of these places where I myself won't go. So in that sense, maybe he sees himself as a Moses creature who will never get to the promised land. I don't know. But but your point, Kale, I think is right in that he definitely isn't in that cultural focus, that hot spot, that's cultural sweet spot, like he was in 1617. And I think sometimes he gets cringy when he definitely tries to get back in that space. And I think that's in many ways sort of at the heart of cringe. And my advice would be, let it happen. Don't make it happen. Don't
be more authentic.
Don't seek the sweet spot so much.
See, we're becoming very sensitive to the BS and people pretending. And I went to the Nashville We Who Wrestle with God show, and I really got the sense after that, and I was talking to some of my friends that we all went with together there, said I think that people want Jordan Peterson to lead them to a place that he has never been. Like, he's inviting people into a journey with him potentially, but he's not really pointing them to where he's already been. It's not like he, like with the Plato's cave, it's not like he's exited the cave and seen the light and come back and said, guys, I saw the light. You come follow me. I'll show you where the light is. He's still navigating through the cave, and he's trying to invite people along the journey with him, but it's almost like you can't expose yourself for not being the expert. You got to try to still be the expert and say, I know where I'm going, come follow me. And it's like, well, I don't know. You, like Kale was talking about, it's like, you seem to be kind of over here, over there. Do you really know where you're going? It's interesting stuff, Jordan, but I've kind of heard it before.
Yeah. Paul, can we talk about ARC finally?
What happened?
What a ridiculous thing. What a totally ridiculous thing, right? Talk about someone falling in love with, the sort of the emissarian project. It's like, so it's just a remarkable, the cheek, the hubris, is to me a staggering thing. And I could be wrong about this. You were there, I was not there, but I was just sort of thinking about this project, and it's like falling in love with the machine versus what you had done up to this point, which was to empower people, to give people the tools they needed to fight the machine right next door, to fight the machine, in the cubicle next to you, rather than some sort of maybe that's just sort of the natural. I get really nervous about transnational organizations. I just don't trust the whole thing. Yeah. Well, I know, believe me. We can talk about that.
I'm less cynical. I'm more questioning in terms of, I still don't know what it is or what they're trying to do. I get more the sense that, okay, for me, when I look at Jordan, I think the two things that the two transformational vehicles that Jordan that were sort of his things was being a therapist, being a counselor, and being a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now both of those things he lost. And so now he sort of saw that, well, he can do some of what he did in therapy via YouTube. And so and the thing again that is at the center of his mission, or at least the center of his validation, is when people come up to him and say, my life is so much better now because of you, Jordan. That's sort of an extension of the therapist role. Can that happen via YouTube? Yeah, something like that. And then also, of course, Peterson Academy, which is coming up now, which I was just thinking this morning how Peterson Academy and Ralston College, I was thinking maybe I should have Michaela Peterson and the head of Ralston College on, because it's very interesting because they're both sort of, Peterson Academy is sort of things untethered from physicality, because it's all in video land. And Ralston College is all about taking students to Greece and Italy and all of these places.
And then back to Savannah.
So I think in a lot of ways, ARC is throwing spaghetti against a wall and seeing what sticks. And I think part of that is connected, Kale, to your observation that he doesn't see the church as a legitimate vehicle for transformation. He's deeply skeptical about that. And that comes through in his message to the church, even though, he's maintaining good relationships with people like Bishop Barron, and he's having conversations with people in the church. But he is skeptical about the church's ability to be a vehicle for social transformation. And fair enough. Fair enough. But you still need a vehicle. And I think remember, before he became interested in psychology, he was interested in political science. And so for him, I think if you say shit or get off the pot, I know Father Eric doesn't like the language. If you say shit or get off the pot, I think I would almost say run for political office, because I think for Jordan, he still holds a candle to that, even though he's got skepticism about that. Well, so again, in that sense, Jordan, besides videos and having big events and writing, I think Jordan is still uncertain about, okay, what is the vehicle to connect up to eternity, let's say. And
so he hasn't found Jesus.
Well, yeah. And of course, for me, the vehicle is the Christian faith and the Christian church. And you might think, oh, look at the mess that the Christian Reformed church is in. Yes, but I am a Protestant. And so all my hope isn't riding on the Christian Reformed church is going to save the world. No, that's not my hope. My hope is Jesus saves the world. So, yeah, I think that is, again, Peterson is in limbo, but it's not just limbo with respect to the church. It's limbo with respect to political structures. It's limbo with respect to educational structures. And even when he goes on Joe Rogan, he promotes his book and he promotes Peterson Academy. But even with Peterson Academy, he kind of says, we're going to try this and see what happens.
Yeah.
And ARC, I think, is very much that way too. And ARC even more so, because whereas Peterson Academy is in-house, it's him and Michaela. His book, well, he writes the book. His shows, he does the shows. His channel, basically he likes Daily Wire because Daily Wire gives him everything he asks for because he's their biggest legitimate star.
Right.
ARC, he doesn't fully control. That's a collaborative effort with people that are wealthier and in some ways more powerful than he is. So he's sort of their headliner, but ARC is a different creature. And I can think also part of the thing with ARC is also ARC is British. It really is.
Okay.
And British is state church. Britannia rules the waves. And remember, Peterson is Canadian. So he's part of the Commonwealth. And so ARC, when it happens again, it'll be again in the center of Brittendom. It will be in London.
Hmm.
So in that way, ARC is, but I think again for Peterson, ARC is, well, let's try something.
Yeah, but London isn't even British anymore. So I mean,
well,
I got to step aside really quick.
What else do they have? You know, the empire. The empire is gone. What else do they have? And so, but that gets into, what we're seeing now. What was I watching? Oh, it was the conversation that I had with the estuary guys, in that, Tayo was really good. Tayo was talking about the fact that, we've been looking at America, watching, the Dems versus the Reps, and thinking the world is coming apart. Right. But hey, the Irish and the Catholics in Ireland are getting together against the immigrants.
Yeah, so that was wild.
What's with that?
Yeah, that was wild.
And I think ARC is, if you listen to ARC, some of it's, okay, we're going to be anti-globalist. All right. But you still need geography.
Okay, so
I was at the Empire.
Yeah, so I was at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford 2 weeks ago, and it's an incredible museum, right? Whatever. And there's a room of early Anglo-Saxon stuff, and there was a map, and I'm kicking myself because I didn't take a picture of the map, but there's a map of the British Isles and most of Western Europe, and it's got all these arrows like going all over the place, and and it got me to think that, at least for me, I have this sort of sensibility that the way the world is right now in terms of people and where they are and all of that, it's like been there forever, right? And you look at these maps of, say, roughly 200 AD to 1066, and the flux and the flow of people in and out of even a relatively small isolated place like England is just mind-boggling. And so then I realized that, well, what was the force that stopped the flow of people? And it's Christianity. Yeah. Right? When Christianity comes in, sort of converts the European continent, all of a sudden, Mr. Viking, it's probably not a good idea for you to sort of sail around, Gaul and, raid the countryside. Like, no, like Jesus does not want you to do that. Right. And again, I'm being silly here, but you get my point, right?
No, that's exactly. Well, Thor,
right?
Thor is going to be on there with the ship. And if you can raid the monastery and take the gold that is accumulated in the monastery, Thor is pleased. Jesus, not so much.
That's right. So you have always, the last several years, you've been talking about the recession of modernity and and you're always really also talking about the recession of Christianity, right? And as formal Christianity kind of recedes, weirdness is kind of coming out, and I look at that on some level as a sort of a period of hope, frankly, rather than doom and gloom. I mean, it's sort of, I'm of two minds about this sort of thing. Okay, so my point here, I guess, is what I'm getting at is that it seems that the default mode of being is flux and change, and so so then we can look at those confounding forces that keep things kind of at bay, and all of those forces that kind of kept things at bay and kept people basically in a place so that they could sort of grow deep roots and cultivate and create civilizations and cultures, that's going away now. And so I look at all of these late attempts to reshore, to shore up these, anyway, to reshore.
Fair point, Joseph. Keep going, Kale.
To reshore up, this sort of this détente, like this, what is, I don't know how it's ultimately going to go. And so I just see a tremendous amount of energy being put into political solutions as if there's a kind of a default that we can kind of return to. And I guess I just don't believe in that return.
Well, I would argue that forms of Christianity are going away and new forms are emerging, and many of the new forms are also ancient forms.
Right. Okay.
And again, I see this in Rogan. Now it's sort of a perennialism, it's a spiritism, but we've gone in a fairly short amount of time in terms of new agey. We went from, no, I'm sorry, new atheist. We went from Christianity has been proven wrong because of science. Okay, so the 20 teens want their line back. Into more, well, we have moral questions about Christianity, which of course the new atheists put on the table. But in some ways, I think the questioning about Christianity now is it too limiting? I mean, is Jesus really superior, or do we have Jesus and DMT elves and aliens?
Right.
Was Jesus really just an alien, sort of like Superman? So, yeah. And I see Rogan and Peterson to a degree, because it was interesting that, unlike some previous conversations, Peterson, while I'd say psychedelic friendly, was not the psychedelic enthusiast that Rogan was in that conversation. It was interesting because Joe kept wanting to sort of go back to psychedelics, and Peterson kept wanting to talk about the Bible. Right. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting.
Yeah. So Rogan's sort of pulling from what he's familiar with. I wonder if, okay, so there's a passage in scripture that says in Revelation, right? They overcame him, the enemy or whatever, by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony.
Yeah. So
I wonder if part of the reason, we're seeing sort of this re-enchantment or whatever, it has to do with Ian McGilchrist's, I think, point with the left brain and the right brain, right? Where story engages both, and the gospel is essentially a story, and you could try, like Jordan Peterson, to sort of work it out just from like a archetypal standpoint, or you could look at it more like somebody like Martin Shaw. This is a true story. This myth actually tells me more truth than just the facts of the matter. And I wonder if that's what we will see. We will see, I don't want to say like a new kind of Christianity or whatever. It's, to Paul's point, it's really the ancient Christian. It is what it always has meant to be. And it's like that G.K. Chesterton quote says, every time Christianity seems to have gone to the good dogs, it's the dog that goes. Christianity that still emerges, right, and endures because Christ holds all things together. So sorry, I kind of jumped back in with a lot of that because this is a part of the conversation that is worth having, even in and around TLC. I see a Christianity that I never saw before. Yeah, partly because I have a podcast and I listen to podcasts and I engage with TLC, and I just see Christianity differently than if I was, and I know there's going to be some resistance to this, if I was just going to church in my physical location. Right. I would see my congregation and I would think that's the only church there is. All these other churches don't have it right, or whatever. But no, I see it in TLC. I think probably Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson are a part of that process, certainly Jonathan Pajot, I would say is part of that, as well.
See, as a Catholic, I think I was primed to engage in TLC because I essentially did a kind of local local satellite version of this since the time I reverted, when I was 19, right? Because there's the local church that I would go down to worship, on campus or what have you, for mass. But there was also the sort of the show going on in Rome, right? And you could say like the show at the United States Council of Bishops. So, there's this other thing going on, this other conversation. I wouldn't go into church to have these conversations. I would engage, through journalism and through whatever was going on. And so I've always had this kind of what's going on over there and what's going on right here as a kind of two-speed, a very kind of sort of weird version of two-speedism. Whereas, Pete, I guess I'm getting the sense that wasn't the case. I'm not a Protestant, so I don't know what it's like to go to a Protestant church, but I would imagine you don't have a version of Rome that you would kind of also look at the same time.
You know what's interesting about, and this is just my own personal experience. I didn't grow up in the church.
Okay.
And I became a Christian in high school. It was a process. I was not a very good Christian. But then I became a missionary. And the organization that I worked with was interdenominational. It was just an independent missions organization. And so my first real glimpse of the church was this sort of ecumenical version of it, where there were Catholic students, there were Protestant students. I didn't come into contact with any Orthodox, but there were Reformed students, there were charismatic students, and we all kind of came to this one place to do the work that we felt we were called to do. And so I guess in some ways I did see that initially, that there was kind of something bigger, something bigger than just my own personal experience or in my denomination that I was with that sent me out as a missionary was not denominational. So yeah, but definitely didn't see kind of what you saw. There wasn't the big thing sort of holding it all together, I guess, but maybe there was, and I just wasn't aware of it.
Mm-hmm. I think there's always this two-speed, this two-level thing going on, Kale. You always have your local church. And then, of course, part of what happened in America during the mainline, that's when you sort of had, the invisible state church.
Right.
So World War I and so America's religions were religious wars, and World War II was a religious war against the Japanese and the Nazis. I mean, we could even ally with who would be our next rival, who would be the communists. And so you've always got those. And of course, after the Second World War emerges evangelicalism as sort of an alternative or an attempt to intensify what the main line was. And I think now in the social media realm, where what's so interesting is Vendonk is always sort of sensitive about the relationship between TLC and Estuary, because in that sense, Vendonk realizes that Estuary is born out of TLC in the fact that no one would come to any event I did at church unless I was handing out $20 or helping with the electric bill. But then suddenly when I talk about Jordan Peterson, randos will come off the street and want to talk about things. And so there's always sort of this two-level stuff going on. And
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think, what's interesting is that, now that I'm reading so much, papal Catholic history right now, the Roman Catholics have, in a sense, always had that, because what do you get at your local church? You get the statuary, you get the mass. You don't get a sermon, really. But then the papacy, Rome, the relics, the Holy Land, I mean, even the Crusades, I mean, they're all trying to preserve the second level. And of course, one of the interesting things now is that Orthodoxy has, I mean, in many ways, Orthodoxy is doing really well in this space right now. And Catholics did really well on TV. And the part of Protestantism that did quite well on TV tended to be a part of Protestantism that a lot of Protestants didn't want to associate with.
Mhm.
So
That's true.
It's
That's true.
interesting how, and so, this question that someone led off the my Bridges of Meaning live stream with was, where's the church going to be 100 years from now? I mentioned at my SGR meeting, I said, my guess is that 20 years from now, 30% of American churches will be no more. Local churches like Living Stones, they will be gone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean Christianity will be gone.
Right. And because that's, I was thinking about what you've been talking about, Paul, especially the last couple of shows that you've done, and what you're talking about here, Pete, with grappling. I think it's fair to say, especially if you can just for a second do the sort of the mental experiment of sort of putting denominational, sort of Homerism on the back burner just for a second. I think it is very fair to say that Christianity has proven itself to be remarkably flexible and remarkably anti-fragile over the span of these 2,000 plus years now. And there's and I think it's worth thinking about why that has been the case, right? When I think of somebody like Joe Rogan and I think of grappling, Pete, I think of that idea that Vervaeke talked about at Chino, which is sort of getting the right grip on something. I think it's important for us to remember, well, what exactly about Christianity worked, right? Christianity solved a problem for people. And it has had a remarkable ability to continue to solve problems for people ever since Jesus rose from the dead and walked out of the tomb. And so when I think of what Rogan is doing, and to a certain extent what JBP is doing, is I think that they're looking at some old discarded tools and they're kind of handling them again. And if you've ever had that experience of like just picking up an old spade or an old wrench or something, and you kind of put it in your hand and you can clearly see that it's well worn and well used, you can kind of almost feel that sense like this has been something that has worked before. And a lot of that is you kind of being able to see again for the first time, right? And so that Paul, to the question that you were posed, like what will Christianity look like in 100 years? Well, Christianity will prove itself once again to be extremely anti-fragile and to answer the deepest problems that we have. And I don't mean, sort of crooner Jesus or, all these sort of these sentimental Jesuses that people have used. And maybe that worked at a time where that was needed. I don't think that we're in the same place. Yeah. But so what I see Peterson handling and even Rogan kind of, kicking the tires is like, okay, I've got a problem, and I'm not enough of a mind reader to know what problem it might be solving for Rogan. I don't know what problem it might be solving for JBP, but you look at somebody like Russell Brand, clearly, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, clearly it is solving a problem for them. And I know that it really sends people into orbit about, political Christianity and all these kinds of things. But what I believe Christianity is a sort of constant annoyance to those people who think they've kind of gotten it figured out. Right. You were talking, Paul, about this conversation you had with Green. And every time I keep trying to click on that link, it's like the wrong one. So I'm really dying to listen to it. But that idea that this sort of process of simplification affords power for a group of people who can simplify the best, right? And if you remember in math class, right, that there is a real power when you can simplify down to its root. You can exchange and move things all around and like, boom, you're like a Superman all of a sudden, right? Yep. The problem is that reality, you always have to sort of carve out a space for particularity, for that thing which cannot be reduced, right? Because ultimately human beings can't be reduced to it. And maybe Rogan, and look, maybe the pressures of being famous, maybe the pressures of having the biggest podcast in the world, maybe the pressures of having, this kind of fame come with it. Like everybody keeps trying to reduce me. And I'm fighting against this reduction. And maybe, just maybe, Christianity as they're trying to sort of grapple with it, is a tool of some sort. I'd hate to call it a tool, but is a tool of some sort where you can sort of reserve your radical particularity. Like God knows you, God knows me, right? He died for me. He knows that he can count the hairs on my head, etc. Right? So I wonder if that is what TLC is sort of grappling with, is like, man, it's like it can kind of work, but it's going to have to shed a lot of its bullshit.
I think tool is a fair term. There's something to this that I think Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw and some of those guys are touching on, because and I said this earlier, but the gospel ultimately is a story. And if you look at Genesis, God tells Adam about the garden. He tells Adam, don't eat the fruit of this tree. Eve hasn't been created yet. God never tells that to Eve. The idea was that Adam was meant to pass on that story or that message maybe to Eve, and he doesn't do it properly. When Eve talks to the serpent, she's added something to the story. She said, well, we can't even touch the tree. That's not the story God gave to Adam. So what did Adam give to Eve? And so in some ways, all of human history has been us mishandling the tool that God originally gave us, which is story, which is a container for holding truth in its most condensed form. I think that's what it is. It's like you can look at this thing from 100 million different ways and it still speaks to you. And I think ultimately, because there's a person in the center of that, that's mysteriously and uniquely holding all of reality together. And so I think you're right. I think, Kale, you're right. And I think, and this is something that I don't have fully fleshed out. So thank you for just letting me sort of word vomit on you guys. But I think there's something to that there is a tool that we're relearning how to use this tool. And I think that podcasting, again, which is why I think Joe Rogan is sort of a barometer for culture and all this stuff. It's like dialogue somehow is changing the world. 3-hour conversations, shout out to Christian Baxter. 3-hour conversations change the world. And it's because we're listening to them. We're re-engaging with story in a way, so.
And I think it's at that level, because we've sort of been talking a lot of 2 levels here. So it's at that level that Peterson and Rogan are being introduced to Christianity not by local churches.
Right.
I mean, the local church for many people, and again, it's usually because when people out of the blue stumble into a local church, it's usually because they have a need and they're hoping that somehow, some way, that local church can help them meet that certain need. It was Robert Schuller who said, find a need and meet it. The Crystal Cathedral guy. Crystal Cathedral now is a Catholic cathedral. But it was, and Peterson and Rogan are sort of up here with Christianity yet. And again, women tend to get practical more quickly. And so it's not surprising that Michaela found her way into churches. And now Tammy has found her way into a church. But Peterson and Rogan are up here. And you also have the issue that once you get to a certain level of status and that FU money, suddenly local attachments are problematic if you're very famous or very wealthy. Because now suddenly local particularities are going to put very heavy hands on you to pull them in. And there's a reason that, presidents just don't go to the local church down the road. If Jordan Peterson came into my church, Rick would recognize him. I don't know how many other people would, but me and Rick would know him. So Jordan, you can always visit Living Stones. You won't be mobbed here. Most people will shake your hand and you'll say, hi, I'm Jordan. They'll say, hi, I'm Corinne. But I think, and I had an inkling of this years ago. This was before any of this happened, where I get a phone call from someone and he says, because I answer the phone. It's a little church, so I answer the phone. Although the phones are disrupted now. Anyway, so I answer the phone and somebody says, you're a Reformed pastor, aren't you? Yes. Could you mentor me? Okay. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. Well, I grew up Mennonite Brethren, but now I'm Reformed. Well, how did you get Reformed? He didn't get Reformed in a church. He got Reformed in a Young, Restless, and Reformed chat room. That was before social media.
Wow, yeah.
And so what's happening now again, and one of the things that Grim Grizz keeps pointing us to is that we're always sort of downplaying these relationships that are being mediated by StreamYard and YouTube and Twitter and Discords. But Grim Grizz keeps pointing us to it. Say, don't look down on them too quickly, because more and more people are finding their transformations in that space. And, did JD Vance, Aaron Wren's sort of been on the JD Vance trail recently. It's really been helpful for me.
Yeah.
Did JD Vance become a Catholic because of a local Catholic church? Or did JD Vance become a Catholic because of all of this? I mean, Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and to a degree, the newer religions like Protestantism, have all of this storehouse of wealth that if you stumble into a local Catholic church, you might never have a clue about, because it's all the local stuff. So, and I think that's part of what's happening.
But Paul, I think it's worth pointing out that, what we're doing right here can only be understood in the final analysis as a liminal.
Agreed.
And I know that. I know you know that.
That's why we have estuary.
Right. We have to see this as a mechanism by which we can re-engage with the local and, flesh to flesh, handshake to handshake, shoulder to shoulder, breaking of bread, so for me, the great solace of this ministry work that you're doing with TLC is precisely that, that it allows me to, I hope, to be a better guy in the flesh.
And as Verdonk always says, there are many people who are in estuaries that have never heard Paul Vanderklay's name. And I would walk into an estuary and they don't think a thing of it. So it is both and. It always is. I'm gonna drop the link and let some of our own sea creatures in. But keep talking while I do this.
I wanted to kind of go back, maybe just real quick, to a conversation Kale and I had, which I think would sort of touched on the students that both Kale and I sort of work around. I think young people are more and more sensitive to story, sensitive to some of the stuff that we've been talking about, sensitive to sort of the authenticity. And I'm, to the question of where will the church be in, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I'm actually really optimistic. I'm really optimistic that, if young people can come into contact with the person of Jesus through scripture, I really think that we will, I don't know what we'll see, but I'm encouraged to imagine what the church might be like. I think it will be beautiful. I mean, we know that if you read the book of Revelation, it's it is this beautiful thing that Jesus himself is building, which is awesome.
Michael,
speaking of youth ministry,
the boomerality. I want to follow more up on your boomerality. You've been doing great work, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you. I felt validated for you noticing my Twitter controversy.
I saw it too, brother. I
don't know. Trolling comes easily to me on those forums. It's not, I wasn't trying to truly insult anybody, but you got to poke people in their axioms, I guess. So But
well, and again, he doesn't know you, and that's this weakness of the space, because I could probably make the same argument, and we'd get on it and debate it and all of that, but he doesn't know who you are, and so bang, you get blocked. That's part of the reason I don't block people on Twitter, because I don't know them. If they say something trollish to me, all right, how long they want to troll me? T Grog's been trolling me for months now in the comment section. I haven't banned him yet. So what'd you have to say, Michael? Did you have a question, or do you have something, the point you wanted to make?
I don't know. I just more or less wanted to pop in to say that. I mean, I'm following the whole thing. It's all very interesting. I think I really do appreciate the realization that there is going to be something new, and I think that maybe that was even some of my thing with people are retreating to these ancient traditions. Christians are more and more, because it's a safe space, I guess, or seemingly so. If it hasn't changed in however many centuries, what's the chance it's going to change now? But when you look at the big picture, Christianity is just a huge history of new things all the time, and they are, but it's a newness that's consistent with what's come before in a different way, and so I think there's a lot of exciting things going on here. I'm waiting, because like my brother-in-law, I know, like, he's a pretty regular Rogan listener. He's gotten into like a lot of he's made several trips down to South America to do the ayahuasca thing and stuff. And so he got married. I sent him a book when him and his wife had a kid. It was that Richard Rohr book that John Van Donk suggested, from wild man to wise man, or whatever. And I was like, this is kind of like, which is weird, because it's like in my church, people would be like, oh, don't listen to Richard Rohr or something. He's got strange beliefs. But now I can see that's kind of the right speed for my hippie brother-in-law who runs a commune. So so yeah, it's just interesting that the more you have your ears in these different corners listening to these things, it's just exciting to see what more will come from it.
All right. Grim Grizz, what say you?
All sorts of things. Which ones you want to hear?
I don't know what I'm picking from, so start with the best.
What's the topic? What's the Joe Rogan mean for the
What
church?
does the rise of Jordan Peterson and the musings of Rogan tell us about religion in the West? There's the topic.
If Joe Rogan is a sample, what it tells us about the religion in the West is that there's a whole lot of people in the West that really, really wish psychedelics were the door to God. That's what it tells us. But other than the agency deck card of the show being the 4 of clubs, I have come here to tell you all, after this stream ends, we'll be hosting a very, very, very special listening party over on the Broken Clock Tower Discord. Ask a friend how to get there.
Okay, no one ever shows me how to get there, ever. I thought we were friends, Griff. I thought we were friends.
You DM'd me successfully on Discord, and I invited you to the server in that DM. If you can find it again, the door is there.
All right.
So yeah, Discord, not always easy to navigate for us old farts. So
Kale,
not gamer people.
How is it that people did not mention that Rogan is a lapsed Catholic as well? But that is a very important part of his perspective.
I didn't know that.
Is that he's a lapsed Catholic? Yeah.
How lapsed is he? How far did he get?
He's Italian. He grew up in it.
Yeah, I think you have to understand. I think you're totally right. And I was trying to allude to that by sort of the Boston Spotlight thing that I invoked earlier. But I think that is not only is that underappreciated by like rank and file folks, but I would argue even most especially the hierarchy continue to not understand the role that continues to play in the ongoing scandal and the crisis of moral legitimacy.
But the growing up Catholic, I think, is very, very important. Having grown up Catholic myself, is the important part of it is that you think you already know what the gospel
That's right.
is.
You think
you've read the book, though you never have opened it.
Yeah, you think it's mapped territory, and it's actually not mapped territory. Absolutely. Totally agree with you, David.
I came for a different reason, but I came in after Chad. And I'm a gentleman.
Well, Chad says go ahead. So go ahead, David. You're next.
Okay, so part of my interest I don't know if people have watched the series Blue-Eyed Samurai, but the most interesting part of that show is they show Japanese theater. So there's an episode which is mostly using puppets, and it is like some of the most compelling stuff imaginable. And this is going all the way back to when you were talking about these like changes in acting style, Paul. And I wonder about that related to people returning to Orthodoxy and Catholicism, where basically you have this idea of like, we want it real. We want it more real. We want people to say prayers from their heart, where they're improving as opposed to reading from a book. But then there's also this thing where you can get to, especially in theater, a level of artifice which makes it like more real than real. So I saw a Shakespeare play where they used red fabric instead of blood. So someone would get their throat slit. It was Titus Andronicus, which it's a lot of throat slit.
A lot of that. Yeah, a lot of that.
So throat slit, and then they released like a red scarf. And I gagged in a way that I don't when I'm watching a movie that's rated R and it's like gore everywhere. Where somehow the ritual engages with your imagination, where like this use of theater
and physical, David. Right? I took a group of kids to see a Shakespeare play a couple of weeks ago, and it's Twelfth Night, and I've read Twelfth Night, and probably even seen a couple of movie versions of it. But let me tell you, when Malvolio comes out in these like really creepy yellow tights that are like laced up, it is physically revolting and creepy in ways that you're not prepared for when you're just reading it on the page. When you're there in the room with this like, it just gag. It's a kind of a gag reflex that it hits, right?
Sorry, but where I'm kind of going with it as well is that this notion of metamodernism, this idea of the fake versus the real. Zizek, like Slavoj Žižek, had this quote where he was talking about the Matrix, and he says, "I want a third pill where I can see what's real through the artifice of the Matrix." Right? It's where you hear the person lying, but the lie actually sometimes gets you at a deeper truth. So this idea of like, honestly, it's like 5 episodes into Blue-Eyed Samurai. There's an episode with puppets, literally puppets, and it will hit you in the heart the way, and it's animated the whole series. It'll hit you in the heart the way that like a live action version of The Little Mermaid is not as real as the animated version of the same thing. It'll hit you truer.
Well, Burn Power's now going to have to do another telethon to raise money for a VPN and American Netflix account so he can watch the puppets. So I'm sure he'll.
It's good. It's episode 5. It's 5 episodes in.
All right. Well, I saw it's animated. It's like, oh no, I gotta. Sometimes I get my wife to watch stuff, and it's like, am I gonna get my wife to watch animated stuff? If it's animated, I'm out. I can get my kids.
It's not anime. It takes place in Japan, but it is not anime. But it is animated.
All right, very interesting. Jeff P, OG Rando.
Hey, Paul. Hey, everybody.
Jeff.
How's it going?
Good. What did you have?
Oh, I just wanted to mention, you were talking about Rogan a lot. He recently had a stand-up special drop on Netflix where he live streamed it. And now it's there where you can go back and watch it. I think that was this past weekend, if I'm not.
You can live stream on Netflix?
Yeah, they've done it twice that I'm aware of. Chris Rock did a live stream within the last year. And Rogan did it this time with his stand-up special.
And what did you think of it?
I think he was in San Antonio. I mean, overall, he made me laugh a few times, and I've watched some other of his stand-ups, and it didn't. So I don't know if his material says more about him or more about me this time around, if it made me laugh. But one of the things that I found interesting and relevant for this conversation is he had a joke in there where he contrasted the difference between having atheist, nihilistic beliefs where everything is just gone and disappears, and how much that contributes to people's anxiety in their existence. And he contrasted that with, but you know what? If I'm just going to go with Jesus, I sleep like a baby, or something like that is what he said. So
wow.
If any truth can be, distilled from a joke like that, maybe it's saying directionally that's more where he's ending up. If you could take anything away from a joke in a stand-up special. So I just found that interesting.
Well, I'm with Pete in that. Peterson labeling Rogan, because you got to know that Peterson and Rogan talk off camera too. Peterson labeling Rogan, and there is a lot of reticence for high status people to sort of come out. Of course, Russell Brand has no filter, so of course there's no reticence for him. But I could imagine someone like Rogan, who has the filter to not talk about his wife or his kids or all of these things. I could understand Rogan, but that he was a lapsed Catholic, I didn't know that, and that's super interesting.
Because that stuff,
Catholicism gets in deep with those
it's
kids.
Deep. I know. No, it's true. It's true.
Partially because of the schooling. Even if you are not actually going to the church, it's still just it is the air you breathe. Was for me.
Yeah, right. And there's just something so profoundly formative about these rituals. You're talking about this blue-eyed samurai thing, and even as a kid, like some of my earliest memories of going to mass, and I'm young enough, I should say, that I never, we didn't do the Latin mass thing. So, I was born in 73. The Latin mass was done away with around 1969, 1970, 71. And so, but even that, like, there's something so consciously affected about the whole thing, and the pageantry and the, all of it, that I think you're predisposed. It works on you in pre and post cognitive ways. Unlike, and again, I'm not trying to throw denominational, bombs around here, but it seems to me a qualitatively different thing than showing up, singing some hymns, listening to a sermon, sing some more hymns, and leave. Like, it's hard to explain why it's so informative.
Can I share a G.K. Chesterton quote with you guys? I posted the whole thing on Twitter, but I wonder if this is part. I know I already quoted G.K. Chesterton once already, but he says this. He says, "I've often had a fancy of writing a romance about an English yachtsman who slightly miscalculates his course and discovered England under the impression that it was a new island in the South Seas." And it's a big quote, but at the end he says, "What could be more glorious than to brace yourself up to discover New South Wales and realize with a gush of happy tears that it's really the old South Wales? That, it seems to me, is the main problem for philosophers, and in a manner, the main problem of this book. How can we contrive to be at once astonished at a world and yet at home in it? How can this queer cosmic town with its many-legged citizens, with its monstrous and ancient lamps, how can this world give us at once the fascination of a strange town and the comfort and honor of being in our hometown?" And I feel like that's where we're going. And I wonder, like it, and Joe Rogan, again, as a microcosm, he may find his way back to the faith of his childhood, potentially, depending on how deep it was ingrained. But it's that tension between the foreign and the unknown and the familiar, the excitement of the foreign and the unknown, but the comfort of the familiar. Right.
What you were saying earlier, there's something about, you think you have mapped this territory, Right, because I think what Chesterton's getting at is like, okay, like I'm smart, sophisticated, like I'm a first world person. Hello, I'm British. Like, I'm good. I don't need any of this churchy crap, right? And you go off and you go around, all of a sudden you show up, you're like, man, this is like an amazing place. Look at these, all these, and you're like, wait, but that's the part of the world you thought you had mapped.
Sometimes you experience this when you are showing someone else the thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
To walk, like I've studied Genesis multiple times.
Yeah.
There's something you only learn when you walk someone else through the book.
Yeah. That's a teacher.
Oh,
yes. Amen.
I'm excited again. I'm excited again.
Yeah.
I'm curious what it was that for a while I was so for a while now I've been wondering, is the culture actually becoming spiritualized, or is it just that I'm being moved around by the algorithms? Am I being is it just the algorithms that are kind of like is it a blue car syndrome? That's the question. Sorry. And I don't know, it's hard for me to tell, because like I think what's happening right now is quite remarkable. We had a great conversation about this on the Discord today. And so, like, why is it that Jesus is making his way into the culture the way that it is? Has this always been the case? Or is it different times? And then to whoever mentioned, Jeff, when you said that Rogan just had this live streaming thing. So, guys, this is coming. Like, I was talking with Neil about this a few months ago about how interesting would it be if Netflix and what's the other one? Like, whatever they are, Amazon, whatever.
Prime.
Yeah, these guys are going to start using this kind of a platform, and they're going to have their own social networks right on their platform, and this is going to be the future of all this. So I don't know I'm kind of all over the place. Also, you like my hat, Kale? Is that pretty nice?
All good, brother. Working like a champ. God bless you.
I was a little triggered when Kale started talking about leggings and things. I thought, is this going to go to denim and caps and sneakers? Is that where this is going?
Just as long as you don't take my boxer briefs or my zip-up hoodies, I'm good to go.
What is this 3.6 million tweet you did, Kale?
I don't want to talk about. I don't want to talk about.
I gotta head out. I'll be in the chat.
I don't want to talk about
this idea. Also, I think this is very important because with characters like Deadpool, the idea of breaking the fourth wall does not work in movies.
Yeah,
the way that it does in theater. When you're in theater, so I directed a production of 12th Night right before right before the lockdowns, and it was a youth company production, and I explained to them, we're going to have this idea of the fourth character, not the fourth wall, because I think Shakespeare's monologues are actually designed that you talk to and ask questions of the audience who are actually there.
Yeah.
When Deadpool looks at the camera, he's not looking at you. When you're in a play, when the priest in a Catholic service says the line and expects you to respond, it actually has to be you. It can't be like, it's not just to the camera and anyone can respond. Right. It must be actually you in the audience.
Yeah.
So is that what's happening with this resurgence of spirituality? Somebody was that you, Paul, talking about this power bit, this lack of power thing? This is huge. And this is what I think why so many folks are kind of spilling into out of desperation. And not to be too corny or anything like that, but it's remarkable. This is remarkable what's happening right now.
It is. And there's going to be a lot of competition for, what's interesting about Peterson Academy is that it's not just videos. They want to, like you were talking about, Chad, they want to have it integrated into a social media platform. Mm-hmm. And in that way, we talk about gamification. It's social mediaification of education. And you know, again, we've got that going while we've got Ralston College, which is sort of the other end of it, where you're not going to learn Greek unless you go to Greece. And what's been remarkable for me, and Kale and I are going to have to do our own conversation about this. What's remarkable for me about now coming back from Italy is that I'm now listening to PAX, and sure, when I think about the Roman Forum, it's a ruin right now, but it's more real now than it was when I was listening to PAX before.
Yeah.
So we're working on multiple levels here. I have to say hi to Nate Van Dennen, who is no stranger to the channel. Welcome, Nate.
Hi, Paul.
What do you have to? He's my fellow moderator on CRC Voices. So if anybody wants to be a moderator on CRC Voices, let us know.
Here.
Go ahead, Nate.
I got an incredible echo. I'm going to have to drop off and get back on because I'm hearing
we hear you fine.
Twice.
I don't hear an echo from you.
Oh, you hear? Okay, I'll keep going. I want to say that to your question,
you have an incredible echo because you have a browser open to this. If you close that browser and are just in StreamYard, your echo will go away. But because you're wearing headphones, we don't hear the echo. That's what's happening.
Turn off YouTube.
You cannot observe the conversation and be in it at the same time.
Yeah, so yeah, there's something to that, I think. Anyway,
you're talking over the fourth wall.
Yeah, I think so. Your question about Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and what are they doing? What's that say about religion in the West? As I think about that, I think lots of people have crazy unexplained experiences all the time. People have visions, people have synchronicities, people have somebody they know got healed and they didn't know why. They had some dark spiritual experience. They didn't know where to process that. And then they show up at church and, well, church isn't processing that either. But then you get online and, well, Jordan Peterson's going to talk about that. Joe Rogan's going to talk about that, and then it does go back to the church because the church Christianity has resources to talk about that. It's just like that. Somebody brought up the idea of a tool before, we got these tools sitting back there, and we haven't touched them in a long time, and. So I think they're bridging this gap between my lived experience as a spiritual person in a ruthlessly material world for the church, almost on behalf of the church. I really liked what you said, Paul, a long time ago about Jordan Peterson being the unauthorized exorcist. I think, that's right. I mean, he's the guy who's no, what's happening to you is real. There's a spiritual world. These, don't deny it. Don't retreat to material world. And there are resources that you can get access to and explore. And then you come into the church and maybe you're disappointed. I think that's what happens to people too, is, they're listening to people talk about all kinds of spiritual stuff. And, like Kale was saying, okay. And then we sing a few songs and you hear a few words and you stand and you sit and you respond and then you leave. And it's like, wait, I thought this was about that. How do we do that? I don't know.
Nate, I wonder about the opponent processor nature of this as well. That I think some of the best Peterson interviews, like why Kathy Newman, that interview is so good, is because he's fighting and correcting, and it actually makes it so that he never goes on those long ramblings that he does when someone is entirely on his side. It's one of the most concise, this is what he's actually getting at, and that Rogan is like this too, because Rogan is they say this, if you want to see if someone really understands it, you have to explain it to a child. So it's like Rogan is not following you, is not on your side. Explain it to him. Make it in such a way that Joe Rogan gets it, as how we have this conversation. And I was invited to speak at a church once, and the weeks kept on moving about, and the pastor called me and said, we had both studied the same passage. And so at the beginning, before I did a sermon, which was only 5 minutes, me and this guy spoke to each other and actually had a dialogue in front of the church, but I pushed him and basically fought with him in front of everyone. Not because I disagreed with him, but because I wanted that push and pull to come out that you get through disagreement, even like a helpful debate kind of a thing.
Your Luke's point here, there's also a false intimacy of the fourth wall. And we saw this with Vervaeke and Hermes. So here with John Vervaeke, we have someone who shouldn't, spiritual experience. John Vervaeke, okay. We're not going to expect a real spiritual experience with T-Grog. But so Vervaeke is now talking to Hermes. And everyone on the internet thinks they know what is happening. Well, it's a demon. It's a this. It's a that. It's a this. It's a that. Everybody in the internet just knows what's happening in John Vervaeke's head. And I think what Nate and I understand, and probably many of you too, is that someone comes into church with a story like John Vervaeke's. What I did with John Vervaeke to a degree in our conversation is what I would do with someone who came into church. And part of the problem is that churches do to John Vervaeke what the TLC and a lot of people in the TLC and the internet does to John Vervaeke is they say, I know what's going on with you. Someone comes into church with a story like John Vervaeke's. They don't take John or his history or his person, or even they imagine they know what the experience is just by listening to 3 seconds of his conversation with Jordan Peterson. Now suddenly they know everything that has to do about it. But on the internet, at least, unlike the church, because you go into a certain church and that this church thinks this is what's going on with Hermes. This church thinks this is what's going on with Hermes. And so depending on what rando church you walk into, you're going to get that shtick. And, but I think actually in a good situation at a church, a pastor or someone will come and actually sit down and say, I don't know this guy. I don't know what's going on with this guy. I mean, how well do any of us really know John Vervaeke? We've heard him talk. We've heard him teach. We've heard all of this stuff about him. But there's a way of knowing someone that it actually takes in, like Kale was saying, in the flesh, in real life. And then maybe now they're having a spooky spiritual experience or exciting spiritual experience or terrible spiritual experience. Pastorally, you begin to understand it's going to take a while till actually, and just because I have an idea about what that experience is, that really doesn't matter much. What matters is what they think the experience is. And until both of us can come to some agreement of what that experience is, we're wasting each other's time. So,
well, Paul, and this is why whatever's happening between all of us in this medium right now, and as we move forward, and what's been happening over the past several years, that's why this is kind of rising above, at least for the people who find it, it kind of rises above the salience. It's like the higher salience because we're actually engaging with each other. And this is so back to what's kind of like, I think Kale said it before, like, we're kind of cringe, like Peterson's kind of cringe at this right now. And it's not because we don't love him. It's kind of like, dude, like it's not really that personal. And so turns out the whole time that damn weirdo Luke Thompson was right the whole time. This was all about
Don't say that.
I can. You guys can't. Don't tell me that. Don't tell me I said that.
Let me quick ban Luke so he can't listen. Mark, you want to say something, and then we got to land the plane soon because it's come that everybody plans stuff right after the live stream, so I don't want to go too long. And Mark, what say you?
The fourth wall thing. I attended my first live estuary at Von Dock's in Chino, so I got the full Von Dock experience. There's meeting. He didn't remember me from any of our encounters through the live streams, and I didn't, which I didn't expect him to, but I certainly remembered him. And there's no experience like meeting Von Donk in person. And then I had this horrific idea of what if I met the two of you in the same room, and I think it might go on
on Dutchman overload, because I just can't imagine. If I could describe, how many people, raise your hands if you've met Von Donk in person. Anybody other than Paul? We got one. Okay. Well, first off, you shake his hand. It's like gripping a hold of a boulder. Okay, shaking his hand is
milking hand. Really?
I know. I believe you. I believe you. And it is a big personality, and you're never going to get that through the screen in a million years.
No.
And I met Jason in person, and that was different than meeting him. And I got to meet Trey and Andrew in person, and I didn't expect to enjoy that, being in their presence as much as I did. Encountering them on screen, one thing; meeting them in person, completely different. It's like, oh, I want to see those guys again. Like, even though they could be my children. I mean, they're that young, and I'm that old. Boomer Quintessential.
Was Federecci there for that meeting or not?
Yes, Federecci was there. Yeah, I met Jacob.
Good.
And that was interesting too. So the live, and I've gotten to do some of the virtual non-estuaries with Chad, and that experience is still, it's just it's the immediacy of an in-person situation. It increases the level of social anxiety if you're given to that. I mean, it's that you don't get on screen. And so it just seems to me, all I'm saying is all of this is just emphasized to me the value and importance of my work locally in my local church and in my community, in my town. I mean, this is great, but I think it's still the neighborhood, the family, the city you're in. That's where it's at. This is good training. This is a good place for bouncing off ideas. I think there is certainly growth and room for places where you can grow here, but I think there is a limit that I experienced when I just from that brief estuary thing, that is just like, oh, okay, now I see there's still more work to be done. If I'm communicating at all, Paul, I don't know.
It come through loud and clear. All right, and then I'm gonna let our corner citizen have the last word.
Hey guys.
Not him.
They don't like truth tellers around here. I know of another truth teller they didn't like either.
Let's leave Mark out of this.
No, I
couldn't resist.
Mark queued me up perfectly. I was just thinking, this past weekend I had a friend's wedding, and the dad was like a super hard charging, like ultra finance, no friends to my knowledge, just work your job, go home, blah, blah, blah. And like totally someone who I'm like, I have no idea how this person would be a Christian, because they have such a clear idea of who they are and what they care about, And then I went to the wedding, and it's like he's a super deep Christian now, and he had a bunch of experiences. But the point of that story is just to say, like, I think that we sort of feel the need to like name what the spirits are doing and name what the higher things are doing in the corner, and which is great, and it's part of what I'd love to do, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it at any time. But like, the greatest work you're going to do is going to be like the work that's right in front of you. And so like the freedom to just like, like you could think about these major forces. You could be living in the Roman Empire, and if you had a scroll that told you the history of the Roman Empire, that'd be fascinating. But would it really change anything? Would it change? So the work that's right in front of you and the work you're doing in your day-to-day life, I just think it gives you the freedom to actually attend to that in a wise way. And then ironically, that might be the most important thing that you do or could have done. Just to echo Mark's point of like how you can actually go and, realize that making coffee at church or, whatever, going to a local estuary can be the most important thing. Rather than trying to name all the principalities and powers there are out there and how they're going to navigate.
All right. I am going to drop the. I'm going to drop the link for the BOM.
I think Mark would be an excellent Malvolio in 12th Night. Mark, you do a great job. You do a great job on those yellow tights.
Speaking of Paul,
I'll
did you?
get some.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Chad.
I was just gonna ask you if you got my link to my stupid estuary song.
Your stupid estuary song?
Yeah.
No.
Man.
How did you send the link? How did you send the link?
I tagged you in YouTube.
Oh, I didn't see it. Text it to me.
Okay.
So that way I'll get it for sure.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Thank you all for joining. Special thanks to Pete and Kale Vander Zelden.
Couldn't resist.
Welcome to the Dutch tribe.
Just try to fit in here. Just try to fit in.
And thank you to all of you who came up on the screen. And well, let's see. Maybe we can. I only played Emily's song once. Emily has that just a piercing song. So let's go to Emily's song.
I'm so tired of all the fighting. I'm tired of pushing what won't give. I see you weary, worn, and restless. You know that ain't a way to live. I don't care for being right. I don't know where to lay the blame. If I never measure up, would you love me just the same? The slow burn war of attrition. No tongues are held, no holds are barred. We supply the ammunition till all we share is one big scar. I don't care for being right. I don't care if I'm wrong. I just want to understand why we never get along. And you've been slaving for the money. You say we've got bills to pay, and there are mouths we've got to feed, and you don't see another way. And I don't care if you are right, 'cause it feels so wrong that two people with this love just can't seem to get along. The years have gone, the kids have grown, the ships all passed in the night. We were rearranging deck chairs, all that matter left our side. We don't have to have the answers. We don't have to shift the blame. 'Cause if we never get along, I'm gonna love you just the same.
I waited for the Lord on high. I waited, and he heard my cry. Tell him we're dancing, we're busy dancing right now.